The poor orc widow begged a lonely farmer for shelter. 2 children clutching her cloak, her body exhausted, her voice still steady. He could have closed the door. He could have stayed quiet. Instead, he chose. And that choice changed everything. The sun faded slowly behind the dunes of the arid desert of shadows when Zurha, widow of the Broken Fang clan, spotted the faint lights of an isolated ranch in the distance. She stopped for a moment, adjusted the fur cloak over her shoulders, and looked at the 2 children walking beside her. Breck, 7 years old, held the hand of his younger sister, Ossa, 5. Both had the jade-green skin of orcs, pointed ears covered in dust, and eyes too large for faces so tired. They had been walking at night for 3 weeks, sleeping against warm rocks during the day to avoid the bounty hunters still prowling the scattered clan's lands. Zurha knew the arid desert of shadows the way she knew the tattoos on her own arms, every curve, every trap, every deceptive wind. But knowing the desert did not mean it was kind. Zurha's companion had died the previous winter. Gorak was a warrior nearly 2.5 meters tall, with long fangs and braided hair woven with carved bones. He was honest and strong, and he did not deserve the death he was given. The bounty hunters raided the camp at dawn before any protective totem could be lit. He was cut down while trying to buy time for Zurha and the children to escape. She never looked back that morning, but she carried the weight of it in every step. The frontier guardians arrived soon after, driving out what remained of the Broken Fang clan from lands the clan had inhabited for generations. They scattered the survivors across the canyons, shattered the totems, and seized the supplies. Zurha was left alone with the orc children. No clan, no territory, no spirit protection of any kind. Rumors reached her through an elder of another clan she had encountered on the road. A human farmer lived alone at the edge of the desert, far from Dust City, far from the Guardians, far from any law that meant anything. He was not described as good or bad. He was described as someone who stayed quiet and left others in peace. For Zurha, in that moment, that was enough. She rationed food throughout the journey. Every piece of dried meat was split into 3 equal parts, and many times she passed her own portion to the orc children without them noticing. Breck noticed. He said nothing, but he stopped complaining about hunger after that. Ossa still counted stars out loud before sleeping, as if the sky were a game. Zurha let her count. It was important that at least one of the orc children still saw the world as play. At night, to drive away her children's fear, Zurha told old stories from the clan. She spoke of the great green boar, the protective spirit that walked between the dunes and drove away predators from those who carried honor in their hearts. She spoke of the green shadows, the ancestors who did not truly die, they only changed form. Breck listened with care. Ossa was already asleep before the end. Zurha did not know if she believed those stories, but she knew they worked. And then, that night, the worn wooden fence appeared on the horizon, and the faint light of a porch glowed like an ember in the middle of the dark. Zurha stopped. She squeezed Ossa's hand carefully, mindful of her tattooed fingers' strength. She studied the ranch for a long moment. There was something familiar about that place she could not explain. A strange feeling, as if she had seen that light before, not with her eyes, but with something deeper. She was not superstitious, but she was not foolish either. She breathed deeply, straightened her spine, and began to walk. Her children followed without a word. The wooden fence was old, but the posts were firm, driven into the dry soil with care. Zurha noticed that as she approached. Whoever built that fence built it to last. That said something about the man who lived there. She reached the gate and stopped. Exhaustion pressed down on her shoulders like stone, and her knees wanted to give. But she did not bend her spine. Breck and Ossa stood behind her, silent, sensing their mother was doing something important. The farmer was on the porch. He was a man of average height by human standards, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, a worn leather vest, and boots caked with desert dust. He did not stand when he saw her. He did not reach for the rifle leaning against the wall. He simply watched, arms crossed over his chest, face without clear expression. That silence was different from the silence of those who were afraid. It was the silence of someone who observes before speaking. Zurha spoke first. Her voice came out steady, even as her tattooed hands trembled faintly at her sides. She said her name was Zurha, of the Broken Fang clan. She said her companion had died the previous winter, cut down by bounty hunters who had invaded the clan's lands. She said the frontier guardians had scattered the survivors, and that she had walked for weeks through the arid desert of shadows with her 2 children, rationing food, traveling at night to avoid being seen. She said she had not come there asking for charity, but proposing an arrangement. She offered work, loyalty, and permanent companionship in exchange for shelter, food, and safety for the orc children. There was no romance in what she said. It was a cruel and honest arrangement, shaped by the merciless frontier of the Green Shadow Canyon, the kind of arrangement only people who have already lost too much can make without shame. The farmer listened from beginning to end without interrupting. His eyes moved once to Breck and once to Ossa, then came back to her. Zurha did not look away. She had not arrived bent, and she would not bend now. When he finally rose, it was slowly. He came down the 2 porch steps and walked to the well on the left side of the ranch. He drew water, filled a bucket, and returned. He set the bucket on the ground near the orc children. Along with a corn loaf, he pulled from inside his vest. Then he took 2 steps back and crossed his arms again, as if making clear that no immediate debt was being created between them. The orc children looked at their mother. Zurha gave a small nod. Breck took the bucket carefully and let Ossa drink first. The farmer watched without comment. The night was deepening over distant Dust City, and the silence between the 2 adults was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of someone still weighing the worth of words before saying the right thing. Zurha felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not relief, not yet, but the possibility of relief. And possibilities on that frontier were rare currency. The farmer spoke for the first time. He said only that she and her children could sleep in the barn that night, that no decisions would be made in the dark, that in the morning they would speak more clearly. Zurha nodded. It was enough for now. The barn smelled of dry hay and old leather, and it was warm in a way the desert night never was. Ossa fell asleep almost immediately, wrapped in her mother's fur cloak, her face buried in the hay as if it were the safest place in the world. Breck took longer. He lay with his eyes open, staring at the wooden boards of the ceiling. "Is he going to let us stay?" he asked in a low voice, speaking in Orc. "I don't know yet," Zurha answered honestly, "but do you think so?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think he's someone who thinks before he acts. That's rare." Breck turned on his side and closed his eyes. Zurha sat with her back against the barn wall, knees drawn to her chest. She did not sleep. Outside, through a gap in the wood, she could see the light from the ranch window still burning. The farmer was awake too. His name was Aldrin. She learned that later, when he brought warm water and bread in the morning and introduced himself without ceremony, the way someone says their own name simply because it is practical. Aldrin had built that ranch with his own hands 10 years before, after losing his family to a fever that swept through Dust City in a summer too hot to bear. He did not tell it all at once. Zurha pieced it together over the days that followed, from small details he let slip without realizing. That first morning, however, what she saw was this. He watched from a distance while the orc children ate, not with suspicion, but with attention. He watched the way Breck broke the bread and gave the larger piece to his sister. He watched the way Ossa, when she finished, folded the cloth the bread had come in, and placed it carefully on the bench. He watched Zurha, who ate slowly and in silence. Her eyes alert to the surroundings as always, the angular features of her face beautiful, even marked by exhaustion. What struck him most was not the words she had spoken the night before. It was the orc children. Orc children marked by loss learn to move differently, with more care, more silence, more awareness of the space they occupy. Breck and Ossa moved that way, and it said everything about how Zurha had raised them through the chaos. She was not seeking rescue. That was clear from the first moment. She was seeking a chance, and there was an enormous difference between the two. Aldrin turned and went to tend the cattle. Zurha watched him work all morning, offering no help yet, only studying. He was methodical. Every task had an order. Every tool returned to the same place. The ranch was worn by time, but it was not neglected. It was the ranch of someone who still cared, even without anyone left to care for. In the afternoon, without anyone asking, Zurha stood and began repairing a section of fence that had given way. She worked with her large, tattooed hands, driving the new post with precise force. No rush. Breck helped hold the wood. Ossa stayed nearby, playing with stones on the ground. Aldrin stopped at a distance and looked. He said nothing. But when the sun went down and the four of them sat together to eat, he served the orc children first. Zurha noticed, and she tucked that away inside herself, like someone tucking away a precious stone found in the middle of the sand. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. A new rhythm was forming in the ranch, slowly, like water finding its way between stones. Aldrin woke before the sun. Zurha woke with him, without arranging it. They worked side by side through the morning without needing many words. He knew what needed to be done, and she learned quickly, watching once and executing without error from the second time on. The orc children adapted to the routine with the ease of the young who have no other choice. Breck began helping with the animals, learning the name of each head of cattle with the seriousness of someone studying something important. Ossa found the small garden behind the barn, where some herbs grew stubbornly in the dry earth, and began watering them every day with a cup of water she carried from the well. But Zurha's caution had not disappeared. She slept lightly, woke at the smallest sound, kept the fur cloak always within reach. Years of loss and betrayal had sewn that caution into her in a way that did not come undone easily. Aldrin seemed to understand without her having to explain. He never approached without warning. He never entered the barn without signaling with deliberately audible footsteps. He never asked questions she was not ready to answer. One night in the first week, Zurha lay awake, listening to a strange sound coming from the desert. A long, low whistle that was neither wind nor any animal she knew. She lay still, eyes open in the dark, and felt the same chill as before, that feeling of familiarity without origin, as if the desert were whispering something she had heard long ago. In the morning she mentioned the sound to Aldrin in passing. He grew serious for a moment, then said it happened sometimes, that the Green Shadow Canyon was 2 days' walk away, and the wind from there carried strange sounds when the moon was in a certain position. Could be, he said. But he had not said it with full conviction. Zurha did not press. She filed the information away. The following night, she reached for the totem she had kept hidden at the bottom of her pack, a small carved bone bearing the marks of the Broken Fang clan, the only object she had brought besides her clothes and her knife. She held it in her palm for a long time in the dark, feeling the familiar warmth of the bone. Totems had no power without the full ritual, without acacia fire and the voice of the shaman. But the elder of the other clan had told her once that spirits do not need ritual to listen, they only need honest intent. Zurha did not know if she believed that, but she closed her eyes, held the totem, and asked in silence that her children be kept safe. When she opened her eyes, Breck was sitting beside her in the darkness of the barn, looking at her. The orc boy said nothing. She put her arm around his shoulders, and he leaned his head against her chest, and the two of them stayed like that until sleep came. The next morning, Aldrin found a dead rabbit on the ranch's front step, with an arrow driven cleanly through it, the kind of arrow no human in the region used. Aldrin stood looking at the rabbit for a long time. Then he turned to Zurha, who had come to his side without making a sound, as was her way. They both looked at the arrow together. It was made of dark bone, with crow feathers at one end, and carved marks along the shaft. Marks Zurha recognized immediately. It was an arrow from the Green Shadows clan. She did not say so immediately. First she looked at the horizon, at the open desert, at the distant rust-colored cliffs. There was no one in sight, but that meant nothing. The Green Shadows clan was known for moving through the desert without leaving visible tracks. They were trackers who had made the Green Shadow Canyon their territory for generations. "Do you know that mark?" Aldrin asked, no accusation in his voice. "I do," she answered. "It's not a threat. It's a warning." He waited for her to continue. Zurha explained. The Green Shadows clan and the Broken Fang clan had a long and complicated history. They were not enemies, but they were not simple allies either. They shared borders in the desert and respected each other's limits with the hardness of those who know what happens when those limits are crossed. A dead rabbit on a doorstep with a clan arrow was an old message. "Someone of our line has passed through here. We are watching. Do not move." "They're not warning you," Zurha said, eyes still on the horizon. "They're warning me." She knew what it meant. Some member of the Green Shadows clan had tracked her to the ranch. They were watching where she was, who she was with, what she was doing, and they were making clear that they knew. What they did with that information depended on what they saw. Aldrin did not panic. He picked up the arrow, examined the marks calmly, and set it on the kitchen table. Then he went to get the coffee that was on the fire. "Then we need them to see the right thing," he said, pouring 2 cups. Zurha looked at him for a moment. He was sitting at the table, cup in hand, completely calm. She felt something shift inside her chest. Not affection yet, but the beginning of trust, which is a rarer and more solid thing. In the days that followed, the two worked more openly than before. Aldrin began teaching her to use the lever-action rifle, not because she needed to learn, but because it was the kind of knowledge that could prove useful. She was strong and precise. She learned to aim in half an afternoon. He repaired the barn roof without being asked, reinforcing the boards with new timber. Breck began walking with Aldrin in the mornings, helping count the cattle. Ossa began falling asleep inside the ranch, in the corner by the fireplace, when the nights grew too cold. None of these details were decided out loud. They simply happened. The arrow stayed on the table for a week. Then one morning, it was gone. Neither of them mentioned it, but Zurha noticed that from that day on, Aldrin began leaving a small piece of dried meat on the large stone near the ranch entrance every night before bed. By morning, the meat was always gone. The sky over the arid desert of shadows had a specific color in the late afternoon, a burnt amber that made everything slower, heavier, more honest. That was the hour when true things tended to be said at the ranch. It had been 2 months since the night Zurha had stopped before the fence. The ranch was different, not dramatically, but in the way places change when they receive care and presence. Ossa's garden had grown. The barn had been repaired. The cattle were heavier. The table had 4 places now, without anyone having decided that out loud. That afternoon, Aldrin and Zurha sat outside, each quiet with their own thoughts, while the orc children played further out with the ranch dogs. He spoke first, without preamble, as was his way. He said there was something he needed to make clear, that he would never take a companion out of desperation, not hers, not his own, that he had seen the world make that kind of quick trade and had never seen it go well. But if she chose to stay as a true partner, not as payment for shelter, not as an arrangement made under hunger, he would stand beside her and her children with everything he had, without half measures. Zurha listened with her eyes on the horizon. When he finished, she stayed quiet for a time that would have felt long to anyone else, but that Aldrin knew to wait out. Then she spoke. She said she was not seeking possession. She had known a good man and had not forgotten what that was. She said she was not seeking eternal gratitude either, nor debt collected in small humiliations over the years. What she sought was belonging. A place where her children could grow without watching the horizon in fear. A place where her past would not be used as a weapon against her every time she disagreed with someone. A place where she could be who she was, orc, widow, mother, a woman of angular and beautiful features, with tattoos and quiet fangs, and a history that asked for no apology, without that being a problem for anyone. Her small fangs showed in a serious half-smile when she finished speaking. Aldrin nodded. He did not answer with words. He extended his hand, palm upward, in the space between the two chairs. It was a simple gesture, almost weightless, but in the customs of the Green Shadow Canyon, between humans and orcs who respected each other, an open, outstretched hand was an old signal. I am without weapons, I am without trick, I am here. Zurha placed her hand over his. Her tattooed fingers met the farmer's calloused palm, and neither of them needed to say anything more. The orc girl, who had approached without being noticed, looked at the joined hands, and then at her mother's face. Then Ossa ran back to play with the dogs, not fully understanding what she had seen, but feeling it was something good. Breck, who had understood, stayed where he was, and looked out at the desert for a long moment, with the expression of someone who has just set down a weight they had been carrying for a long time. The night arrived with the cool the desert only offered after the amber, and in the ranch the window light stayed on until late, not because anyone was awake with worry, but because no one had remembered to put it out. The trust of an orc child who has already lost does not arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, tested carefully, pulled back at the smallest wrong sign, offered again with more caution. Aldrin knew this, not because anyone had taught him, but because he himself had been that kind of child long ago. Breck was the first to test. He did it subtly, in a way only an attentive adult would notice. He began drifting closer to Aldrin during morning work, asking short questions about the cattle, the fences, the desert weather. When Aldrin answered with genuine attention, the orc boy came back the next day with another question. It was a slow and methodical test. He built with the logic of an orc child who had learned that adults who answer well the first few times do not always keep answering once the novelty passes. Aldrin kept answering, always. Ossa tested differently. On a windy afternoon, the orc girl came running into the ranch with a dead lizard she had found in the desert, a small, dried-out animal that had clearly died from the heat. She placed it on the dinner table with the full seriousness of the world and announced that it needed to be buried with honors, because it was a warrior that had survived the desert for a very long time. Zurha looked at her with an expression that mixed exhaustion and tenderness. Aldrin paused for a second, then went to the cupboard, took out a clean cloth, and folded it carefully into the shape of a small cloak. He wrapped the lizard with the same care he would give to something important. He took Ossa to the garden and helped her dig a small hole with a wooden spoon. They buried the lizard together. The orc girl invented a farewell speech that lasted 4 minutes and included 2 titles she had made up on the spot. Breck watched it all from the window, and when Aldrin came back inside, the orc boy was smiling sideways, mouth closed, trying to hide it. He did not hide it. The seasons turned over the arid desert of shadows with the slowness that place was known for. First, the brutal summer heat, then the dry winter cold that hardened the soil and drove the cattle together near the hay. Zura and Aldrin worked through each season with the seriousness of those who know the ranch does not forgive carelessness. They built a new chicken coop. They expanded the garden. They fixed the water pump that had broken down in the winter. The nearest neighbors, two farmers who lived half a day's ride away, began appearing from time to trade supplies. At first, they looked at Zura with the calculated reserve of those who are not sure what to make of her. She received them without hostility and without subservience, with the natural dignity of someone who does not need approval to exist. Over time, the looks changed, not because she had done anything to please, but because the ranch was prospering. The Orc children were healthy and well-mannered, and it was difficult to look at all of that and find anything worth suspicion. The small bone totem of the Broken Fang clan ended up, in time, on a shelf inside the ranch, not hidden in the pack, but in plain sight beside one of Aldrin's old penknives and a drawing Ossa had made with charcoal. No one had arranged that. It happened naturally, the way nearly everything that mattered in that place did. It was in the second winter that the past tried to come back. A man arrived at the ranch one cold morning on horseback, wearing the golden badge of the Frontier Guardians pinned to his vest. His name was Pruth, and Zura recognized him before he even dismounted. He was one of the men who had been present during the dispersal of the Broken Fang clan. He was not the one who had shot Gorak, but he had been there. That was enough. Aldrin went to the gate. Zura stayed on the porch, still, with Breck and Ossa at her sides. She did not reach for her knife and showed no visible tension. She simply stood, quiet, her eyes fixed on the man. Pruth said there were reports of a fugitive Orc with 2 children who had settled illegally on human lands without the Guardian's authorization. He said he needed to verify the situation. He said this looking at Aldrin, as if Zura were not present. Aldrin heard him out calmly. Then he said that this was his ranch, built with his own hands on land he had purchased with his own money, registered at the courthouse in Dust City with name and date. He said Zura was his partner, that the Orc children were part of his family, and that there was nothing illegal happening on that ranch. He said it without raising his voice and without taking his hands out of his pockets. Pruth looked at Zura for a long moment. She held his gaze without blinking, the angular features of her face composed, the tattoos visible on her forearms crossed over her chest. There was something in her eyes, not hatred, but memory. The kind of memory that does not forget and does not need to shout to be understood. The Guardian remounted his horse after a silence that lasted long enough to make clear it was a choice and not a defeat. He said he would return if there were new reports. Aldrin said he was always welcome to check on a ranch in order. Pruth left without answering. When he disappeared into the dust on the horizon, Ossa tugged at her mother's skirt. "Is he coming back?" "Maybe," Zura answered honestly. "And what happens if he does?" Aldrin came down the porch steps and crouched to the Orc girl's level. "The same thing that happened today," he said. "We're in order. Order speaks louder than a badge." That night, after the Orc children were asleep, Zura and Aldrin sat on the porch for a long time, looking out at the dark desert. She said quietly that she had spent years believing that belonging to a place was something that only came from blood and clan, that without the Broken Fang clan, there was no place in the world that was truly hers. She said she had discovered she was wrong. Aldrin did not answer immediately. When he spoke, he said only that belonging is not the place. It is who is in the place with you. At the top of the nearest cliff, nearly invisible against the starlit sky, an Orc figure in a dark vest with a bow on their back stood still for a moment, looking down at the ranch below. Then they disappeared into the darkness of the Green Shadow Canyon without a sound, as always. Spring came to the arid desert of shadows the way it always came, without warning and without ceremony. Just a morning when the air was slightly different, and the herbs in Ossa's garden had put out new shoots overnight. Breck found the shoots first, and went to wake his sister before the sun had even risen, which was rare for him. The ranch had changed so much in recent months that sometimes Zurha stopped in the middle of a task and looked around with the attention of someone trying to memorize something. The new barn, the garden that had tripled in size, the chicken coop with 20 birds, the table with 4 places, the totem on the shelf, Ossa's drawing on the wall, beside 2 others the orc girl had made afterward, one of the ranch seen from above, the way a bird would see it, and one of Aldrin with the crooked hat she found funny. Breck had grown 3 fingers taller since they arrived. The orc boy now carried a small penknife Aldrin had given him, with the instruction that a tool without a proper owner is no good to anyone. He cleaned it every night before sleeping. Ossa had stopped counting stars out loud before falling asleep, not because the world had lost its wonder, but because the orc girl no longer needed the ritual to feel safe. Zurha noticed that, and kept a full heart for a good while. One morning that spring, she went to the large stone at the ranch entrance, the one where Aldrin left dried meat every night. On the stone there was something new, a small braided leather strap with a deep green crystal bead at the center. It was an ornament of the Green Shadows clan, the kind left to signal recognition between clans, not friendship necessarily, but recognition. Zurha picked up the strap and examined it for a long time. Then she tied it around her wrist, over the tattoos, and went about the day. In the afternoon, she and Aldrin repaired together the last section of fence that still needed attention, a stretch on the north side that had given way during a winter sandstorm. They worked in silence, the way they did nearly everything, with the rhythm of 2 people who no longer need to negotiate each movement. When they finished, Aldrin leaned against the new post and looked toward the horizon. The sun was going down again behind the dunes, turning the sky amber. Zurha stood at his side, the green crystal strap catching the faint light on her wrist. "Do you still feel that sensation?" he asked. "The one you described once, like you had been here before." She thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she said, "but it has changed. Before it felt like a warning, now it feels like recognition." He nodded, as if that made complete sense. The orc children came running from far out, kicking up dust, Ossa in front and Breck behind, pretending to be losing on purpose. The ranch dog barked twice and ran along. The noise reached the 2 adults like a small, loud, joyful storm, and Zurha opened her arms without thinking, catching the orc girl with the ease of someone who has done it all their life. The ranch was in order, the family was whole, the horizon was quiet. But somewhere beyond the Green Shadow Canyon, where the desert met the Black Mountains to the north, a dark smoke was rising slowly against the clear sky, the kind that did not come from a campfire, the kind that announced something had shifted out there, far away, in lands that had no name yet on the Frontier Guardians' maps. Zurha saw the smoke over the orc girl's head. She said nothing, but her eyes stayed on it for a long time as the sun finished setting and the night began to come.